Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here today. I acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful country and families, past and present. Meg Perkins, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd also like to acknowledge a long-time mentor of mine, and that's Jackie Huggins, whose work I've used consistently throughout my career and in my thesis. So this study is many years in the making. I actually first became aware of FASD in 2008, and it was a light bulb moment for me personally and professionally. So just acknowledgements there of my supervisors, critical reference group. Also, I must acknowledge the Noongar community. Without their support, this project would never have been finished. The 180 Aboriginal participants, 6 families, and I also must acknowledge our relative and our foster carers throughout Australia that care for children with FASD and other undiagnosed disabilities. So the aims of this study was 2 things: to record the stories of families raising Aboriginal children with FASD in Perth and the Southwest region, and to also explore the awareness of FASD amongst the Aboriginal community in Perth and the Southwest. And I'm going to give you a quote from a relative carer, and this is what she says. "Get onto every single service that you can that's Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, especially the ones that claim to help people with disabilities, because this is a real disability. No matter what anybody says, no matter whatever box you try and put it into, you have a child that has a mental disability. They have inability to cope or function that normal children do. From a young age, it's obvious. That cause and effect stuff is not there with cognitive. They don't understand right from wrong, that they're actually doing wrong. That's why half of the prisons are filled with them, because they don't know what they've done." Now, I just want to go back historically in Western Australia, and the dates that you see here are probably similar around the country. So we know from the historical policies that Aboriginal people were not did not have legal access to alcohol until approximately the 60s. For some states it was earlier than that, but most times that was a short-lived process. So in Western Australia, in around 1963, we had legal access to alcohol. But of course, as we know, throughout the country, the stolen generations occurred until the 1970s. So we had, of course, what is well documented, the medicating trauma with alcohol and binge drinking, which continues to the present day. So while we know that FASD is a mainstream health problem, it's heightened for us in the Aboriginal community because the majority of our population is under the age of 24, and we have a birth rate higher than mainstream population. So we are not an ageing population, and this is something that I'm seeing happening in my generation is that we are really struggling to absorb the amount of undiagnosed disability within our families. We've had no awareness of FASD until recently. Like I said, I myself was not aware until approximately 10 years ago. We've had the loss of a lot of good programs such as CDUP that I'm convinced protected those with undiagnosed disabilities and FASD, in protecting their income. Okay, I just want to touch on some of these facts here. So Australian research found that 51% of children diagnosed with FASD were also found to have a sibling with FASD, and only 41% were living with their biological parents. So we're missing the opportunity to prevent further cases of FASD. And they are the most vulnerable in terms of lack of diagnosis and the opportunity to reach their best potential in life. Okay, so here I'm just going to go into some of the key findings. I'm also another person that can't paint. So this artwork here was generously donated by my nephew, and it was a survey tool that we developed because we could not find a tool that was appropriate for our community. So our kulangas is the Noongar word for our babies and children. So as you can see there, it was developed in consultation with the Noongar community, critical reference group, academic peers such as Robyn and the Literature Review. Okay, so I went on country with this survey, and it was a paper-based survey. And the towns that I went to included Northam, Albany, Katanning, Tambler and Bunbury. I had 180 Aboriginal participants, and you can see there was 109 females and 71 males. And in every town that I went to, the community were really well engaged. And what the survey did was acted as an icebreaker to start beginning the conversation. Okay, so here's some of the results. In their response to this question, awareness of FASD, whilst you can see that, yes, 61% were aware, what we need to take notice of is the level of awareness. So only a minority, 10%, were confident in their knowledge of FASD. This question here, were you or anyone in your family part of the stolen generations? You can see there that the majority were either themselves or immediate member of their family were part of the stolen generations. And this is just capturing what we know as those traumatic life histories within our families and our communities. So in response to these questions, do you know anyone female that drinks alcohol during pregnancy? The response was 67% said yes. Do you think it's common to drink alcohol during pregnancy? 32.2% said yes. Anyone in your family possibly have FASD? 37.8% said yes. Unsure was 47.8%. So when we ask them what kind of information do you want on FASD, you can see here the responses. So referral for diagnosis, 44%. Supporting a family member with FASD, 47%. All of the above, 42%. Okay, and how would you like the information on FASD delivered? So here you can see that a culturally secure way of presenting information on FASD, where I come from, is in small groups, 45%. This shouldn't surprise us. Community forums, 54%, one-on-one. And take notice of online, because it is so easy to just think that we'll put information online and people can access that. Okay, and as we know, a lot of families don't have Wi-Fi at home, don't have a computer. Okay. So this part here goes to the 6 families. What you can see in this slide is there were 6 families that I recorded their stories, and 6 families, and this included 3 relative carers and 3 foster carers, because one of the things that I wanted to see is whether there was any differences. This also backs up the international baseline evidence on FASD, and that is none of these children were raised by their biological parents. Okay, so what we also know about children with FASD is that they come into care earlier and they stay longer than any other child. You can also see there under health issues what were the main impact of this disability for the child. So the other thing to just think about and reflect on is that for the relative carers and the foster carers, looking after these children, you can get a sense of how much of their time is spent on constant round of medical appointments. Because one of the findings of this study was that none of these families were able to remain a two-income families. So it is a social and financial sacrifice by carers. Okay, so as I just mentioned, most families were on a single income. The impact on their health was significant, and this also impacts placement. Carers shared that it was the stress of an unknown system and dealing with professionals who don't understand about FASD that was more stressful than raising a child with FASD. Many are raising siblings, as I mentioned. There's also loss and grief for families and carers. And none of the carers that I interviewed were provided respite and training. Now, another thing that with the relative carers is that they had less access to resources than foster carers. So in Western Australia, this was actually picked up back in 2007 in the Ford Review, addressing that the inequities of relative carers. So they're raising children with undiagnosed disabilities, but not receiving the same amount of resources. And this also even included access to diagnosis. So the inequity is starting way back here. Okay, so just sharing some of the themes again from the families. Behavioural problems were consistent across all the families. I mentioned the financial disparity. Trauma, there was a lot of trauma, and there was also the suspected generational FASD, and so half the family suspected that the mother had FASD herself. Schooling was really difficult for children, and it was very, very difficult for the kids to stay engaged in the school system because teachers who were not aware of FASD. But also too, there was success. And this is all credit to these families. So one adult male, is now in a stable relationship and a loving and caring father for his two children. So what we also know from evidence is that if we have the diagnosis and early intervention and throughout their childhood, they can actually raise their own children. Two male adults were long-term employed in gardening work. Another two male adults had their driver's licence and their own vehicle. 3 male adults did not develop the secondary disabilities such as mental health, alcohol and drug use. So if we were to cost out what these families actually saved the taxpayer, it would be in the millions. So what we also know from the evidence is that a stable family is one of the most protective factors for children with FASD. Okay, so just a couple more quotes from the relative carers. When DCP brought him to me, they said he had FASD and that he probably wouldn't walk or talk. So throughout his life, we've been in and out of PMH, doing tests, fighting infections, checking brainwaves. And this one. The younger one in my care was supposed to get a hip replacement. We had bone-on-bone crunching against each other. Could you imagine a young man walking around in that kind of pain? So FASD is actually referred to now as a whole of body disorder. Okay, and just this is my last slide, just some solutions and ways forward. Building capacity on FASD at local levels. Like the forum that was held recently in the NT, those kind of forums, they are critical to building capacity at the local level. And it's going to take lobbying and lobbying and lobbying. Because one of the things that we're constantly told is that there is no money for diagnosis. And without diagnosis, we will not start the process for interventions and appropriate treatments, as I'm sure Ray will be able to tell you better than I can. It's critical we have Indigenous-led holistic FASD interventions, training on FASD for our carers and our families. I speak from personal experience that becoming aware of FASD myself I'm guilty as well of judging behaviour without understanding what FASD was. So it's made a significant change in my life and in my family. And there are things that we can do that don't cost money. It just takes awareness and talking about it amongst our families. Parenting programs must be adapted. Traditional parenting programs will not work for raising children with FASD. And we need an urgent call for champions in all our communities. Okay, thank you very much.